The scream cut through the desert night like a blade through silk, sharp and desperate and wrong. Marcus Holt froze mid-step, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt at his hip. He had been tracking the Cartwright gang for 3 days through the Badlands of Arizona territory, following their trail of burned homesteads and stolen lives. But this sound, this cry of terror and pain, was different from the usual violence that followed in their wake. It was the voice of a child. Marcus crouched behind a cluster of barrel cacti, his weathered face grim in the moonlight. Below him, in a natural bowl carved from red stone, the bandits had made their camp. 8 men, maybe 9, sprawled around a fire that cast dancing shadows against the canyon walls. Their horses stood tethered nearby, heads hanging low with exhaustion. But it was the small figure tied to a dead mesquite tree at the edge of the firelight that made Marcus's blood run cold. The boy could not have been more than 12, his copper skin gleaming with sweat and blood. His long black hair hung in matted strands around his face, and even from this distance Marcus could see the raw marks where ropes had bitten into his wrists. The child's head lolled forward, unconscious or close to it, his small chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. "Little savages finally quiet," one of the bandits laughed, spitting tobacco juice into the fire. The flames hissed and sparked. "Thought he'd never stop that caterwauling. Should have put a bullet in him hours ago," another voice growled. "Waste of good rope, keeping him alive." The leader of the gang, a scarred man with yellowed teeth and cold eyes, looked up from cleaning his rifle. "Boy's worth more alive than dead, at least for now. The army's paying good money for Apache scalps, but they pay even better for live ones they can parade around, make examples of." Marcus felt his jaw clench so tight it ached. He had seen enough of the army's examples during his years as a cavalry scout, had participated in enough of them to know the taste of shame, bitter and metallic, that never quite left his mouth. That was why he had left the service, why he now made his living as a bounty hunter, targeting men who deserved whatever justice found them. But this boy had done nothing wrong except be born Apache, in a territory where that alone was considered a crime. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and unwashed bodies up to his hiding place. Marcus studied the camp with the practiced eye of a man who had spent years learning to read violence before it happened. The bandits were drunk, their voices loud and careless. Their weapons lay scattered around the fire, within reach, but not immediately ready. Most importantly, they felt safe here in this hidden canyon, surrounded by miles of empty desert. That confidence would be their downfall. Marcus began to move, staying low and keeping to the shadows cast by the towering stone walls. His boots made no sound on the sandy ground as he worked his way around the perimeter of the camp. Years of tracking had taught him to move like a ghost, to become part of the landscape itself. The Apache had been his teachers in that, though they had never known it. Watching them from a distance, learning their ways, their silent communication with the land itself. Now he would use those lessons to save one of their own. He reached the far side of the camp, where the horses shifted restlessly in their makeshift corral. The animals sensed something different in the air, their ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring. Marcus whispered soft words in Spanish, a language he had learned from his Mexican mother before the fever took her when he was barely older than the boy tied to the tree. The horses settled, recognizing the gentleness in his voice. From here, he could see the child more clearly. The boy's face was swollen from beatings, his lips cracked and bleeding. But there was something in the set of his shoulders, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of defiance. This was not a child who had broken easily, despite whatever the bandits had done to him. Marcus drew his knife, the steel blade catching a glint of starlight. The plan was simple enough in concept, though deadly in execution. He would circle back to the tree, cut the boy loose, and carry him to safety while the bandits slept off their whiskey. If he was lucky, they would be miles away before anyone noticed the boy was gone. But Marcus Holt had learned long ago that luck was a luxury he could rarely afford. He was halfway to the tree when the boy stirred, his dark eyes opening and finding Marcus immediately. For a moment, they stared at each other across the flickering firelight. The child's gaze was sharp and intelligent, taking in Marcus's approach, his drawn blade, the careful way he moved to avoid the sleeping bandits. The boy said nothing, but his eyes asked the question clearly enough. "Friend or enemy?" Marcus touched a finger to his lips, then pointed to himself and nodded toward the canyon walls. The boy understood immediately, his body tensing in preparation to run. Here was a child who had learned early that survival depended on reading the intentions of dangerous men. Marcus was almost to the tree when everything went wrong. One of the bandits, a thin man with a pockmarked face, rolled over in his sleep and knocked his bottle against a rock. The glass shattered with a sound like gunfire in the quiet night. The man jerked awake, his hand immediately going to his pistol. "What the hell?" he began. Then his eyes found Marcus crouched by the tree, knife in hand. "We got company!" The camp erupted into chaos. Men rolled out of their bedrolls, grabbing for weapons and shouting confused questions. Marcus cursed under his breath and sawed frantically at the ropes binding the boy. The thick hemp fibers parted just as the first shot rang out, the bullet chipping stone inches from his head. "Run!" he shouted to the boy, pushing him toward the canyon wall. "Get to the rocks!" But the child stumbled, his legs weak from hours of captivity. Marcus caught him before he could fall, lifting the boy and carrying him as bullets whistled around them. The bandits were shooting wild in the darkness, their aim spoiled by whiskey and panic, but it would only be moments before they organized themselves. Marcus reached the base of the canyon wall and set the boy down behind a boulder. "Can you climb?" he asked urgently. The boy nodded, his eyes wide but unafraid. "You came for me," he whispered in accented English. "Why?" "Because it was right," Marcus replied, then stood and drew his Colt. "Go, climb, don't look back." The firefight that followed was brief but vicious. Marcus had the advantage of cover and sobriety, but the bandits had numbers. He picked his shots carefully, making each bullet count. The leader of the gang went down first, clutching his shoulder and screaming orders from the ground. Another bandit fell as he tried to flank Marcus's position, his rifle clattering away into the darkness. But there were too many of them, and they were spreading out, surrounding his position. Marcus felt a bullet tug at his sleeve, another ricochet off the rock beside his head. He was running low on ammunition, and the boy was only halfway up the canyon wall. That was when he heard the sound that changed everything. It started as a whisper, barely audible above the gunfire. Then it grew, multiplying, echoing off the canyon walls until it became a chorus of voices raised in harmony. Apache voices singing a war song that made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. The bandits heard it too. Their shooting faltered, then stopped altogether as the sound washed over them. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from or how many voices were singing. The acoustics of the canyon made it seem as though the very stones themselves were joining in the ancient melody. "Jesus Christ," one of the bandits whispered. "How many of them are there?" The answer came not in words but in action. Arrows began to fall into the camp like deadly rain, each one finding its mark with terrifying precision. The Apache warriors moved like shadows given form, appearing and disappearing among the rocks with supernatural grace. They wore no war paint, made no war cries beyond their song. They simply appeared, struck, and vanished again. Marcus pressed himself against the boulder and watched in awe as the Apache dealt swift justice to the men who had tortured one of their own. It was not a massacre, but an execution, carried out with the efficiency of a people who had been fighting for their survival for generations. In less than 5 minutes, it was over. The bandits lay still around their dying fire, their weapons scattered and useless. The canyon fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through stone and the soft crackling of burning wood. An Apache warrior emerged from the shadows, his movements fluid and sure. He was older than Marcus had expected, his face lined with age and wisdom, his graying hair braided with feathers and beads. Behind him came others, perhaps a dozen men, all moving with the same predatory grace. The leader's eyes found Marcus immediately. For a long moment, they studied each other across the space between cultures, between worlds. Then the Apache spoke, his English careful but clear. "You came for the boy." It was not a question, but Marcus nodded anyway. "I heard him scream. I couldn't leave him." "Why?" The same question the boy had asked, but with deeper weight behind it. Marcus holstered his gun slowly, showing his empty hands. "Because he's just a child. Because what they were doing was wrong. Because—" He struggled for words that could bridge the gap between their worlds. "Because he's someone's son." The Apache leader considered this, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he gestured toward the canyon wall, where the boy was climbing down, his movements quick and sure now that safety had arrived. "His name is Ayana," the leader said. "He is my grandson." The boy reached the ground and ran to his grandfather, speaking rapidly in Apache. The old war chief listened, nodding occasionally, his weathered hand resting on the child's shoulder. When the boy finished his story, the leader looked back at Marcus. "Ayana says you called him son when you carried him to safety. He says you were ready to die for him." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. Any man would have done the same. "No," the leader said quietly. "Any man would not." The other warriors had begun gathering the bandits' weapons and supplies, moving with efficient precision. But their leader remained focused on Marcus, studying him with the intensity of a hawk watching prey. "I am Nalnish," he said finally, "war chief of the Chiricahua. This canyon is our sacred place, where our ancestors spoke with the spirits. The boy was taken from our hunting camp 2 days ago. We have followed the trail here." Marcus nodded, understanding beginning to dawn. "You were already coming." "We were, but we would have been too late. The white men planned to leave with the dawn, to take Ayana to the fort." Nalnish's voice carried a weight of things left unsaid. "You gave us time. You gave us our grandson." The war chief stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could see the intricate beadwork on his leather shirt, the scars on his weathered hands. "Tell me, white man, what is your name?" "Marcus Holt." "Marcus Holt," Nalnish repeated, tasting the syllables. "You have Apache blood." The question surprised Marcus. "My grandmother, my father's mother. She was captured as a child, raised by settlers. I never knew her." Something shifted in Nalnish's expression, a recognition that went deeper than words. "The spirits work in strange ways," he murmured. "They bring us full circle when we least expect it." He turned to his warriors and spoke in rapid Apache. They nodded and began to disperse, some heading back up the canyon walls, others preparing to leave with the captured horses and weapons. But Nalnish remained, along with young Ayana and 2 other men. "You will come with us," the war chief said to Marcus. It was not a request. Marcus hesitated. He had spent years tracking criminals across the territory, always alone, always moving. The idea of entering an Apache camp, of being surrounded by people who had every reason to hate him for the uniform he had once worn, made his stomach clench with old fear. But Ayana stepped forward, his young face earnest in the firelight. "Please," he said in English, "my grandfather wishes to honor you. You saved my life." And so Marcus found himself riding through the desert night, following Apache warriors on paths that seemed to exist only in their memory. They moved swiftly but silently, their horses' hooves making no sound on the rocky ground. Marcus rode beside Nalnish, the old war chief occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing knowledge of the desert that white men had never bothered to learn. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, they crested a ridge, and Marcus saw the Apache camp spread out below them. It was larger than he had expected, perhaps 40 or 50 wickiups arranged in a loose circle around a central fire. Children played between the shelters, while women worked at various tasks, their voices carrying on the morning air. The arrival of the war party caused a stir of excitement. People emerged from their homes, calling out greetings and questions. When they saw Ayana riding safely among the warriors, their joy was palpable. An older woman, her hair streaked with silver, ran forward and pulled the boy from his horse, holding him close and speaking rapidly in Apache. His grandmother, Nalnish explained to Marcus. She has not slept since he was taken. Marcus watched the reunion with a strange tightness in his chest. He had spent so many years alone that he had almost forgotten what it looked like when people truly cared for each other, when family meant something deeper than blood. Nalnish dismounted and gestured for Marcus to do the same. "Come," he said. "There are rituals to be observed." Beat. What followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. He was led to the center of the camp, where the entire tribe gathered in a circle around the fire. Nalnish spoke at length in Apache, his voice carrying the weight of ceremony. Marcus caught a few words he recognized, but the meaning was lost to him. Then Ayana stood and spoke, his young voice clear and strong. He pointed to Marcus several times, and the crowd murmured approval. When he finished, Nalnish gestured for Marcus to stand. "Ayana has told the story of his rescue," the war chief explained. "He has told them how you risked your life for a child you did not know, how you were prepared to die rather than leave him to his fate." He paused, his eyes meeting Marcus's. "This is not the action of an enemy, this is the action of a brother." An old woman approached, carrying a leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork. From it, she withdrew a necklace made of turquoise and silver, the stones catching the morning light. Naalnish took it from her with reverence. "This belonged to my father," he said, "and his father before him. It has been worn by war chiefs of the Chiricahua for 7 generations. He held it up, the silver gleaming. "Today, we give it to you. Not as a war chief, for that honor must be earned in battle over many years, but as a brother, as family." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I can't accept this. I'm not Apache. I'm not family." "Blood does not make family," Nalnish said quietly. "Actions do. Honor does. The willingness to sacrifice for others makes family." He stepped forward and placed the necklace around Marcus's neck. "You have Apache blood, but more importantly, you have an Apache heart. Today, you are our brother." The ceremony that followed was unlike anything in Marcus's experience. There was singing and dancing, stories told in both Apache and English for his benefit. Children who had been shy around him at first began to approach, drawn by his obvious acceptance by their elders. An old man, introduced as the tribe's medicine man, painted symbols on Marcus's face with red ochre, each mark carrying meaning that was explained to him in careful detail. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself drawn into conversations about everything from hunting techniques to the best ways to read weather patterns. The Apache were generous with their knowledge, treating him not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, this sense of being part of something larger than himself. When evening came, Nalnish led him to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp. "This is yours," he said simply, "for as long as you wish to stay." Marcus looked at the dwelling, constructed with the same careful attention to detail as all the others. Someone had taken the time to prepare it for him, to make him a place in their world. "I don't understand," he said. "Why are you doing this?" Nalnish smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Because you gave us back our grandson. Because you showed honor when it would have been easier to show indifference. Because—" he paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because the spirits brought you to us for a reason, Marcus Holt, and we do not question the wisdom of the spirits." That night, as Marcus lay on the soft buffalo hide bedding, he listened to the sounds of the Apache camp settling into sleep. Children's laughter gave way to the low murmur of adult conversation, which in turn faded to the natural symphony of the desert night. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. But peace, he had learned, was often temporary in the American West. 3 days later, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. Scouts had been watching it since dawn, and as it drew closer, they could make out the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers. An entire company, perhaps 60 men, riding hard toward the Apache camp. "They come for you," Nalnish said to Marcus, his voice calm but tense. "Someone in the nearest settlement recognized you, reported that you were seen with Apache warriors." Marcus stood at the edge of the camp, watching the approaching soldiers. He recognized the lieutenant leading them, a young man named Crawford, who had served under him years ago. The boy had been green then, full of righteous anger and certainty about the righteousness of his cause. Now he looked older, harder, his face set in lines of grim determination. "I should go," Marcus said. "I should meet them before they reach the camp." "No," Nalnish said firmly. "You are our brother now. We do not abandon family." But Marcus was already walking toward his horse, his mind made up. He had brought enough violence into these people's lives. He would not be the cause of more bloodshed. He rode out to meet the cavalry column alone, his hands visible and empty. Lieutenant Crawford raised his hand, bringing his men to a halt 50 yards from the Apache camp. The young officer's face was flushed with heat and dust, his eyes hard with suspicion. "Marcus Holt," Crawford called out. "You're under arrest for consorting with hostile Indians and interfering with military operations." "What military operations?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice level. "The recovery of stolen property and the apprehension of known criminals," Crawford replied. "Intelligence indicates that Apache raiders have been stealing cattle and attacking settlements throughout the territory. We have orders to bring in any Apache found in the area for questioning." "These people aren't raiders," Marcus said. "They're families, children, elders. They're trying to live in peace." "That's not your determination to make," Crawford snapped. "You're a civilian now, Holt. You don't get to decide military policy." Behind Marcus, he could sense the Apache warriors taking positions among the rocks and brush. They were vastly outnumbered, but they had the advantage of terrain and knowledge of the land. If shooting started, many would die on both sides. "What do you want, Lieutenant?" Marcus asked. "I want you to surrender yourself and come back to the fort for questioning. I want these Apache to disperse and return to their assigned reservation, and I want no trouble from anyone." Marcus looked back at the camp, where Ayana stood beside his grandfather, the boy's face tight with worry. The necklace Nalnish had given him felt heavy around his neck, a weight of responsibility and belonging that he had never carried before. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. Crawford's hand moved to his saber. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Marcus. You know I'll follow orders. Then you'll have to go through me to get to them." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the space between their horses. Crawford's young face was troubled, caught between duty and the knowledge that Marcus Holt had been a good soldier, a man he had respected. "Sir," one of Crawford's sergeants said quietly, "we've got movement in the rocks. They're surrounding us." Crawford looked around, seeing for the first time how exposed his position was. The Apache had used the terrain to their advantage, positioning themselves so that any assault on the camp would be costly. His men were brave, but they were also young and far from home. "Last chance, Holt," Crawford said. "Come with us peacefully, and we'll consider this a misunderstanding." Marcus was about to answer when he heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. From the south, a small group of riders was approaching, their horses lathered with sweat and travel. As they drew closer, Marcus recognized the lead rider and felt his heart sink. It was Colonel James Morrison, the commanding officer of the nearest fort. Morrison was a career soldier, a man who had built his reputation on successful campaigns against various Indian tribes. He was also Marcus's former superior officer and the man who had court-martialed him for refusing to participate in the massacre of a peaceful Cheyenne village 3 years earlier. Morrison rode up to the confrontation with the confidence of a man accustomed to command. He was older than Marcus remembered, his hair more grey than brown now, but his eyes still held the same cold certainty that had made him both feared and respected throughout the territory. "Marcus Holt," Morrison said, his voice carrying across the desert air. "I should have known you'd be at the center of this." "Colonel," Marcus replied neutrally. "It's General now," Morrison corrected, "and I'm here to offer you a choice. Surrender yourself and convince these Apache to return to their reservation peacefully, and I'll ensure you receive a fair trial. Refuse, and I'll consider you an enemy combatant and deal with you accordingly." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. Around him, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his decision. Behind him, he could sense the Apache warriors tensing for battle. Ahead of him, 60 cavalry soldiers sat their horses, hands near their weapons. "And if I refuse?" Marcus asked. Morrison's smile was thin and cold. "Then I'll do what I should have done 3 years ago. I'll eliminate a threat to the peace and security of this territory." "These people aren't a threat," Marcus said. "They're trying to live their lives in peace. They haven't bothered anyone." "They're Apache," Morrison replied, as if that explained everything. "They're a threat by definition." The conversation was interrupted by a new voice, young and clear, speaking in accented English. Ayana had stepped forward from the camp, walking boldly toward the line of soldiers. His grandfather tried to stop him, but the boy shook his head and continued forward. "You want to arrest my brother," Ayana said, his voice carrying surprisingly well across the distance. "But you do not know what he did." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Brother? He saved my life," Ayana continued, stopping just behind Marcus's horse. "When bad men took me, when they hurt me and planned to sell me to soldiers, he came for me. He risked his life for a boy he did not know." The young Apache looked up at Morrison with eyes that seemed older than his years. "You say we are dangerous. But who is dangerous? The man who saves children or the men who buy them?" Morrison's face flushed with anger. "That's enough. Lieutenant Crawford placed both men under arrest." But Crawford hesitated, his young face troubled. "Sir, if what the boy says is true—" "I don't care what the boy says," Morrison snapped. "He's Apache. They lie." That was when Nalnish stepped forward, his weathered face calm, but his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "I am Nalnish, war chief of the Chiricahua," he said in clear English. "And I say that Marcus Holt is my brother, adopted into our tribe by sacred ceremony. Any who would harm him must first go through me." One by one, the other Apache warriors stepped forward, each man placing himself between the soldiers and Marcus. They carried no weapons, but their message was clear. To reach Marcus, the cavalry would have to kill them all. Morrison's face was red with rage now. "This is mutiny, Crawford. Order your men to charge." But Lieutenant Crawford was staring at the line of Apache warriors, at the children and women visible in the camp behind them, at Marcus Holt sitting quietly on his horse between two worlds. The young officer's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly on his reins. "Sir," Crawford said quietly, "I don't think this is the right thing to do." "I didn't ask you to think," Morrison roared. "I gave you an order." "Yes, sir," Crawford replied, but he made no move to signal his men. The standoff stretched on, tension thick in the desert air. Marcus could feel sweat trickling down his back despite the cool morning air. One wrong move, one nervous soldier, and this would become a bloodbath. That was when he heard the sound that changed everything for the second time in a week. It was singing, but not the Apache war song he had heard in the canyon. This was different, gentler, a melody that seemed to rise from the earth itself. The Apache women had begun to sing, their voices joining in harmony that spoke of loss and hope, of love and sacrifice. The effect on the soldiers was immediate and profound. These were young men, most of them far from home, many of them with mothers and sisters and sweethearts they missed desperately. The song touched something deep in their hearts, reminding them of humanity in a place where it was often forgotten. One by one, the soldiers began to lower their weapons. Not on orders, but because the song made it impossible to think of the people singing it as enemies. They were mothers singing for their children, wives singing for their husbands, sisters singing for their brothers. Morrison saw what was happening, and his fury reached a breaking point. "Damn you all," he shouted, drawing his sidearm. "If you won't do your duty, I'll do it myself." He raised his pistol, aiming directly at Marcus. But before he could fire, Lieutenant Crawford spurred his horse forward, placing himself between his commanding officer and the target. "Sir, I can't let you do this," Crawford said, his young voice steady despite his obvious fear. "Get out of my way, Lieutenant, or I'll shoot through you to get to him." "No, sir," Crawford replied. "I won't be part of a massacre, not today." Morrison's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, one of his sergeants spoke up. "Sir," the man said quietly, "the boy's right. This ain't right. These aren't the hostiles we were told to find. These are families." Other soldiers began to nod agreement, their faces showing the conflict between duty and conscience. Morrison looked around at his men, seeing the doubt in their eyes, the reluctance to follow orders that felt wrong. "You're all cowards," he snarled. "Traitors to your uniforms and your country." "No, sir," Crawford said firmly. "We're soldiers, and soldiers are supposed to protect the innocent, not slaughter them." The standoff continued for several more minutes, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Morrison found himself isolated, his authority undermined by his own men's refusal to follow immoral orders. Finally, with a curse that carried across the desert, he holstered his weapon and wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over, Holt," he called back. "I'll see you hanged for this." But as he rode away, his soldiers did not follow immediately. Instead, Lieutenant Crawford approached Marcus, his young face earnest. "Mr. Holt," he said quietly, "I want you to know that not all of us believe in what the general was trying to do. Some of us remember what you taught us about honor." Marcus nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you, Lieutenant. You did the right thing." Crawford looked past Marcus to where Ayanna stood with his grandfather. "The boy was right, wasn't he? About what you did?" "He's a good kid," Marcus said simply. "He deserved better than what those bandits had planned for him." The young officer was quiet for a moment, then he saluted. "It was an honor serving with you, sir. I hope our paths cross again under better circumstances." As the cavalry rode away, Marcus felt hands on his shoulders. He turned to find Nalnish and several other Apache warriors surrounding him, their faces showing relief and respect. "You chose us," Nalnish said simply. "When you could have chosen safety, you chose family." "It wasn't really a choice," Marcus replied. "You can't abandon family." That evening, the Apache held another ceremony, this one more solemn than the first. Marcus was formally adopted not just as a brother, but as a protector of the tribe. The responsibility was both honor and burden, but he accepted it gladly. As the celebration continued into the night, Marcus found himself sitting with Ayanna by the fire. The boy had been quiet since the confrontation with the soldiers, his young mind processing events that no child should have to witness. "You could have left," Ayanna said finally. "When the soldiers came, you could have gone with them. You would have been safe." Marcus looked at the boy, seeing in his dark eyes the same strength and wisdom that marked his grandfather. "Where would I go?" he asked. "This is my home now. You're my family." Ayanna smiled, the expression transforming his face. "My real name is Kai," he said. "It means little bear. Ayanna is what the white men call me when they want to pretend they know us." "Kai?" Marcus repeated, tasting the name. "I like it better." "My grandfather says you have a new name too," Kai continued. Goyaway. It means one who yawns, but not because you are lazy, because you are calm in danger, like a man who is so unafraid that he might yawn in the face of his enemies. Marcus felt the weight of the new name, the responsibility it carried. He'd been many things in his life, soldier, scout, bounty hunter, drifter. But he had never been anyone's brother, anyone's family, anyone's protector in the truest sense of the word. "Go Yahweh," he said, letting the Apache syllables roll off his tongue. "I'll try to be worthy of it." "You already are," Kai said simply. 3 months later, Marcus stood on a ridge overlooking the Apache camp, now relocated to a hidden valley deeper in the mountains. Below him, the people who had become his family went about their daily lives in peace. Children played, women worked, men hunted and told stories. It was a life far removed from the violence and uncertainty that had marked his previous existence. He still carried his guns, still rode out on patrol with the other warriors to ensure their safety. But now he fought for something more than money or justice. He fought for home, for family, for the right of peaceful people to live their lives without fear. Kai appeared beside him, the boy moving with the silent grace that all Apache children learned early. He was taller now, his face showing the first signs of the man he would become. "My grandfather wants to speak with you," Kai said. "He says it is time for you to choose." "Choose what? Whether to stay or go, whether to be Apache or white man. He says you cannot be both forever." Marcus looked down at the camp, at the life he had built among these people. "What do you think he wants me to choose?" Kai smiled. "I think he wants you to choose with your heart, not your head. And I think your heart chose long ago." That evening, Marcus sat with Nailnish by the fire, the old war chief's weathered face thoughtful in the dancing light. They had spoken of many things over the months, sharing stories and wisdom, building the kind of friendship that transcends cultural boundaries. "You have been with us for 1 full season," Nailnish said. "You have proven yourself as a warrior, a protector, a brother. But I must ask you now, what is your choice? Will you remain with us, or will you return to the white man's world?" Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding the fire, at the people who had accepted him without reservation, who had given him something he had never thought to find, a place to belong. "I choose family," he said simply. "I choose home. I choose to be Apache." Nailnish nodded, satisfaction clear in his dark eyes. "Then it is done. You are no longer Marcus Holt, the white man who saved our grandson. You are Goyawe, son of the Chiricahua, brother to our people, protector of our children." The ceremony that followed was the most solemn Marcus had ever experienced. His white man's clothes were burned, replaced with traditional Apache clothing. His hair was cut and braided in the style of a warrior. Sacred symbols were tattooed on his chest and arms, marking him permanently as one of the people. When it was over, he looked at his reflection in the still water of a mountain stream and saw a man he no longer recognized. The face was the same, but everything else had changed. The eyes held peace instead of restlessness, purpose instead of uncertainty. Years passed. Marcus, now known only as Goyawe, became one of the most respected warriors in the tribe. He married a young woman named Desba, whose name meant goes to war, and who had proven herself as fierce a fighter as any man. Their children grew up speaking Apache as their first language, learning the old ways alongside the new wisdom their father brought from the white world. The outside world changed around them. The Indian wars intensified, then gradually wound down. Reservations were established, some tribes were forced to relocate, others fought to the bitter end.